Today on Christian World News, life in North Korea or communist China. That's how some Australians are describing their country under extreme COVID restrictions. Has the land down under become a police state?
Plus, U.S. President Joe Biden mandates vaccines for millions of workers. That has many Americans seeking exemptions, including those based on their religious faith.
And a faithful witness. Despite the threats to their lives and freedom, Christians in Afghanistan say they'll keep following Jesus Christ. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Christian World News. I'm George Thomas.
And I'm Wendy Griffith. The coronavirus has turned the land down under upside down. Australia used to be known for its fierce individualism and defense of personal freedoms.
Now, extreme lockdowns and intense tracking of citizens have people claiming the country has turned into a police state. Dale Hurd has the story.
In a now viral tweet, an Australian posted what they said is a view of the world's largest prison from space, a map of Australia. Australia is still a democracy, but its COVID restrictions are severe. It's hard to enter or leave the country unless you're a politician or a celebrity. Citizens are tracked with apps and soon by facial recognition. In some states, you have to have your phone scanned before entering a church. And some have been arrested for simply posting on social media about protests against COVID restrictions. The rest of the world is starting to ask if Australia can still be called a free country. Australia's lockdown has been so draconian, it's brought comparisons on social media to how Australia began, as a prison colony. This pregnant Australian mother was handcuffed and hauled away by cops in front of her children for simply posting on Facebook about a lockdown protest. The charge was incitement.
What on earth? Excuse me, what on earth?
Just put your phone down.
Can you record
relation
this?
to-
I'm in my pajamas.
What's
I had
this?
an ultrasound in an hour. because
Yeah,
I'm
she's pregnant.
This leader of an anti-lockdown group, also arrested for incitement, has now been in jail for 3 weeks.
You're under arrest for incitement.
Have you guys been following me?
Police helicopters look for lockdown violators, like these folks trying to enjoy an evening on a rooftop. And the government has fired rubber bullets and tear gas at anti-lockdown protesters, including children. James Allen, Garrick Professor of Law at the University of Queensland, calls it heavy-handed despotism.
It's been appalling in Australia, and I say that as a big fan of Australia. I'm Canadian, you can tell from the accent. But it's come as a real shock to me how conservative friends are perfectly happy to go along with this.
Australia consists of 6 states and 2 territories, each with their own COVID restrictions. Under a new home quarantine plan for international travelers, if you don't send the government your photo and location when it sends you a text, the police will come to your door. Melbourne pastor Paul Furlong has been arrested 3 times and placed in solitary confinement for opening his church during the lockdowns.
The reason I did was for what I believe was a greater law, and that was to obey the word of God. And so I had to choose God's law over man's law.
This church in Sydney, shown before the lockdown, was raided and fined for holding what authorities called an illegal service and for not scanning people's phones before they entered. Some pastors are now concerned that the government could require a vaccine passport before entering a church. We asked Evan Mulholland at Australia's conservative think tank, the Institute of Public Affairs, if he still considers Australia a free country.
Well, it's a good question. It's a question a lot of people across the political spectrum have been asking. These things don't happen in a vacuum. They happen when the political and cultural elites slowly take away our freedoms and they become normalised.
Australians have also begun turning in one another to authorities, East German style. In this tweet, an Australian mother was desperate to find a way home with her son and needed to cross a state border, violating lockdown restrictions. She was turned in to police. With this kind of behavior, you might think many thousands of Australians have died from COVID. But the death toll is under 1,200 out of a nation of 25 million people, or 0.0047% of the population. Almost 3 times that many Australians die every week from normal causes. But one poll showed most Australians favor living without freedom because they fear COVID more than any other Western nation.
You know, the media has just scared people senseless. The average person thinks, if I catch this, I'm going to die.
There have been several large and sometimes violent demonstrations against the lockdowns and against planned vaccine passports, and hundreds have been arrested. The government says the death toll would have been much worse without lockdowns, and is saying now that life can only return to normal when most of the country is vaccinated.
They describe giving back our freedoms as some sort of a treat, as some sort of a reward, something that can be given back to us and aren't our fundamental freedoms that were stolen from us in the first place.
The Australian journalist Clive James once said the problem with Australians is not that so many of them are descended from convicts, but that so many are descended from prison officers. It's a quote that's being talked about a lot these days. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Here in the United States, President Biden's vaccine mandate has put millions of American workers in a quandary. They want to refuse a shot based on their religious convictions.
The question is, how do they go about claiming a religious exemption? And will it be up to the Supreme Court to decide if they have a right to do so? Our Heather Sells explains.
For months, evangelical leaders have encouraged followers to get the vaccine.
Hi, welcome to Pastors and the Vaccine.
With all kinds of campaigns to encourage the faithful, now the president's new push to mandate the shot has some in the pews opposed.
Although many denominations and high-profile evangelical leaders support the vaccine, a number of people of faith also oppose it for spiritual reasons. And they're seeking guidance on how to claim a religious exemption.
People are entitled to religious accommodations under Title VII of employment discrimination law.
There's basic protection for faith in the workplace thanks to federal law and the Constitution. When it comes to the vaccine mandate, however, many aren't sure how to claim a religious exemption. And thousands have been calling places like the Religious Freedom Institute for help.
RFI, the Religious Freedom Institute, doesn't provide legal services, but we still receive calls with people asking, what are they able to do in light of their objections?
Legal scholars say the key is not a church's doctrine, but an individual's sincerely held belief.
The Supreme Court has made it very clear that religious convictions that merit protection are individual. I don't have to have a church behind me.
What we want to avoid is employers, and worst of all, the federal government becoming some sort of Star Chamber inquisitorial board, probing into people's religious beliefs. If a person says, these are my reasons, I disagree with abortion, sanctity of human life, I know that the aborted fetal cells were part of the testing, that should be it. That should be the case closed on whether or not they have a sincere belief. You don't need a letter from your pastor.
But Oklahoma pastor and Senate candidate Jackson Lahmeyer is doing just that, telling people that if they join his church, he'll sign their exemption.
It's not an anti-vaccine thing, it's a pro-freedom thing.
Berkeley cautions people to sort out their reasons and avoid pursuing this exemption if motivated by politics.
Religious exemptions are meant to be a remedy to a particular kind of issue, and just objecting to bad policy is not what religious exemptions are for.
Still, in the months ahead, untold numbers could claim them. In a telling sign, 3,000 LAPD employees plan to file, and the lawsuits have already started. The White House may have a hard time telling the courts that OSHA has the right to mandate a shot.
Think about what OSHA is about. It's about chemical exposures in the workplace, hard hat regulations on construction sites. This is conduct outside of the workplace that they say must be part of the workplace. This is a real stretch.
It's unclear how the Supreme Court might eventually rule, especially with weakened religious protection after the 1990 Smith ruling.
The government can win if it has a compelling interest, really, really important interest, and there's no way to accomplish that without infringing on liberty. And, when you're looking at a pandemic and people dying, the government is certainly going to try very hard. Even if they're under the tough standard, they're going to argue that we meet that standard.
It's a high-stakes fight that could severely weaken or empower religious liberty in the months and years ahead. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Thank you, Heather. One mission agency, the Southern Baptist International Missions Board, has announced mandatory COVID vaccines for new missionaries or those returning to the United States. A spokeswoman told CBN that a religious exemption would not apply, as they've already received numerous vaccines. Other Christian ministries, like Compassion International, for example, are waiting on more information from OSHA to better understand the new requirements. Wendy?
Up next, the Taliban is set to resume strict enforcement of Sharia law. Afghanistan's Christians say the growing darkness will drive people to the light of Jesus Christ.
Well, this week, the Taliban announced it will return to harsh enforcement of Sharia law, including executions and amputations. Still, some are asking, could this country become the heart of revival, Christian revival, that is, in the Middle East?
Wow. One ministry that's worked with the underground church there predicts that might just happen. As Caitlin Burke reports, even with the Taliban's efforts to squelch the message, Afghan Christians continue to live and spread the gospel.
As the new Taliban government tightens its grip on Afghanistan, people can plainly see the darkness of Islam spreading, and they're running toward the light.
As Job says, in the book of Job, he says, when a man is in a heap, on the ground, he stretches out his hand to God. And so it's in the midst of the desperation that souls are hungry. And so it's a moment of opportunity.
Joel Richardson with Global Catalytic Ministries says history proves that oppressive Islamic governance leads to revival in the church.
Iran has the fastest growing church in the world. 7 years after the ISIS blitzkrieg, there's a revival in northern Syria. The establishment of Islamic government provides ripe soil for the church to grow.
The church in Afghanistan is determined to do the same.
They're still actively meeting, studying the scriptures together, worshiping, and sharing the gospel. We actually have a report of one of our leaders who has been sharing the gospel with Taliban members that came into their village, and they've actually been engaging in Bible studies and prayer.
While it's often the sensational reports that make headlines, like a recent one that falsely claimed the underground church there had been martyred, or others that spotlight heroic action, Richardson says Afghanistan's Christians are just real people choosing to live out their Christian faith.
They say they're scared. Many of them are in despair, but it's in that weakness that they're still pushing forward, and they're finding sweetness in all of it.
One Afghan Christian recently reporting back to Global Catalytic Ministries, quote, "There is pain and joy right now. God hasn't left. There is no need to fear what the Taliban is doing. Yes, bad things may happen to us, but God will do something and glorify his name." Richardson worries this could be the calm before the storm, but he says Christians there have submitted themselves to the will of God, come what may.
They've given their future, their fate over to the Lord, knowing that it could result in martyrdom. They understand that very, very clearly, but yet they're pushing forward regardless.
The biggest prayer request right now is for divine protection. One Christian writing that they continue to remember the passage where Jesus' enemies are after him and he passes through a crowd and disappears. Divine camouflage. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
And we pray for that divine camouflage. Turning now to the U.S. southern border, where the largest expulsion of migrants in decades is taking place. Some 13,000 people, most of them from Haiti, have been living under a bridge in the Texas town of Del Rio. The U.S. now sending them back to Haiti, although officials say many are being sent to cities across the United States that had already been living in Central and South America before converging on the border and don't want to return to their home country. The U.S. envoy to Haiti has resigned to protest the deportations.
Haiti has been crippled by natural disasters on top of economic and political upheaval. The survivors of these disasters have nowhere to live and no clean water to drink. So who has been bringing relief and going into these areas no one wants to go? Once again, here's Heather Sells.
It's hard to overstate the devastation in Haiti right now. On top of political and economic crises, the August 14th earthquake killed thousands, and it damaged both homes and schools.
This region has been affected by multiple shocks. Economic crisis related to COVID, cyclones, earthquake now. The earthquake that hit left all these people with nothing.
It killed 2,000, injured more than 12,000, and destroyed 53,000 homes. Just 3 days later, Tropical Storm Grace flooded the streets. After all this, hundreds of schools must now be rebuilt or repaired, forcing the government to delay the start of the school year. Operation Blessing spokeswoman Emanuela Del Swan tells CBN News Haitians have no idea when classrooms will open.
Too many schools has been collapsed, so the Ministry of Education has to postpone the reentry, but everyone is wondering how.
The earthquake struck the southwest part of the country, cutting off access to roads and making the relief effort to remote areas even more difficult. Operation Blessing has targeted those communities.
When we meet with the Ministry of Health, the government, we say we don't mind going where other people doesn't want to go, because we are here to serve the most needy people.
And they are serving by sending food kits, water and filtration systems, along with medical brigades to the hardest to get to areas. In the southern port city of Lakai, Samaritan's Purse also brought in an emergency field hospital.
We brought in a lot of medical relief supplies, the infrastructure we need to operate in this kind of environment where there's little electricity. So we came fully prepared and self-contained.
While the aid is welcome, it's not near enough. Operation Blessing reports that health facilities are overwhelmed. More than 100,000 need clean drinking water, and there's growing risk of disease, such as cholera and malaria. Thousands of families still have no place to sleep after their homes were destroyed. And following the July assassination of President Jovenel Moïse, gang control and violence are on the rise. That is chasing away potential foreign investors, slowing down relief, and destabilizing the country at the very moment it needs to come together. Del Swan says Operation Blessing is trying to help the Haitians regain their hope so that they can begin to rebuild their lives. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Thank you, Heather. Up next, it's being called the largest single gift ever made to medical missions. Meet the amazing Jewish philanthropists who are coming alongside Christian hospitals in Africa.
Welcome back to Christian World News. Healthcare in Africa is getting a significant boost to the tune of $18 million. That's how much the couple in our next story is giving to Christian missionary doctors serving on the continent.
And they are an amazing couple. Mark Gerson and his wife, Rabbi Erica Gerson, believe deeply that they are fulfilling the Jewish command to love the stranger by helping those who serve Africa's most needy. Take a look. Spend time with Mark and Erica Gerson, and you'll quickly discover their passion for helping those less fortunate is rooted in love.
Love is always an action word. When we commit to loving somebody or something, it means that we have to do something to manifest that love.
Mark is a New York-based entrepreneur and philanthropist. His wife, Erica, is a Jewish rabbi. The Gersons say the deep love for their faith compels them to give away millions of dollars of their personal wealth each year to fulfill their Jewish obligation to love the stranger.
The Bible never tells us to love our children because it's something we will do without the Bible's help. We'll love our children even if nobody instructs us to do so. Yet the Bible tells us to love the stranger over and over again, 36 times, because loving the stranger is not something that comes naturally. It's not something that comes easily.
The Gersons are putting the practice of loving the stranger by supporting the work of African Christians and missionary doctors across the African continent.
When we learned some 20 years ago about the work of Christian missionary doctors in Africa and how they're sacrificing everything in order to serve the poor by bringing health care to those who otherwise wouldn't have it, we said, this is what it means to love the stranger.
This week, the couple pledged a record $18 million, along with matching funds from the United Bank of Switzerland and others, to support the work of African Mission Healthcare. which he co-founded 11 years ago.
This gift of at least $20 million, and hopefully the matching grant will make it much more than that, is going to transform African healthcare. It's going to enable us to build the systems, the infrastructure, the hospitals that will treat literally millions of patients now and into the future.
CBN and the Gersons have partnered on several projects on the continent to provide quality, compassionate care to patients. African Mission Healthcare says this latest gift from Rabbi Erica and Mark Gerson is the largest private gift ever to Christian medical missions. They firmly believe the Bible verse in Malachi 3:10 that when you help the stranger, God will pour out his blessings.
God says, test me. I believe it's the only test that God uses in the Bible. Is this, test me, give to charity, he says, and you will enjoy blessings yourself. And it is so true. No one has ever made a donation to serve the African poor by supporting Christian missionary physicians and regretted it. It has been the blessing of our life. It has been the blessing of Erica and my life to be able to partner with these sacred people, these doctors who are working in Africa in the name of their Christian faith to serve the poor. And it's something that we always want to do more of.
You can learn more at our website, cbnnews.com. We'll be back right after this.
And finally this week, in the Philippines, boxing icon Manny Pacquiao is campaigning to be president. Pacquiao, who is a senator right now, made the announcement Sunday. He's also an outspoken Christian who has criticized the government of President Rodrigo Duterte. A one-time ally of Duterte, Pacquiao has accused him of increasing corruption in the Philippines. Pacquiao responded to critics who say the boxer is not qualified to be president, saying, quote, "I am a fighter, and I will always be a fighter inside and outside the ring." It's going to be an interesting race.
Yeah, and we've profiled his faith. Our colleague Lucille Talusa has interviewed him, and he's an amazing person and a great believer as well.
Personally, he's got my vote, even though it doesn't count.
All right, folks, that's it for this week's edition of Christian World News.
Till next week, goodbye, and God bless you.